Hello valued viewers, I hope you're all doing very well. Today we are simulating a US SSN delousing a US SSBN from Soviet SSNs. The reason I'm looking at this today is I've recently finished this book, which was a very good read. It follows the 25-year career of a British SSK and SSN commander. One of the chapters in the book really piqued my interest. The chapter was about a UK SSN delousing a UK SSBN from Soviet hunter-killer submarines. For this simulation, I've changed the British assets to US assets simply because we don't have the required British assets. But we're going to be operating in the British geography. So first, it's best if I explain the chapter, then we'll explain what we're actually doing today and what all this means. So the chapter focuses on an incident in 1985 during a peak of Soviet submarine activity in the late Cold War. What happens is this. Strategically placed acoustic hydrophone arrays known as SOSUS in the GI-UK gap, which is here to Iceland and then to the UK, detect higher than usual Soviet submarines, all heading from the Barents Sea here into the Atlantic, or known as the Western Approaches. The SOSUS array, which isn't just here, it's other parts of the world as well, can not only detect but also classify the types of Soviet submarines. On this occasion were 3 Soviet SSN hunter-killer submarines and 2 SSGN submarines, and SSGNs are of course carrier killers. When high activity like this is detected, it's the job of the British SSNs to intercept these submarines and find out what the Soviets are up to. There are generally 2 reasons why Soviet submarines would enter the Western Approaches. One was that it was the natural route to get into the Mediterranean here, where Soviet hunter-killers and SSGN missile firers would locate and shadow US carrier strike groups, and they have done that through the history of the Cold War. Once located, they would wait for firing orders, and if it was given, which would obviously mean that a conflict had started, then they would fire either their missiles or torpedoes at the US carriers. The other reason would be to try and find British or US SSBNs, our nuclear deterrent. Since pretty much the start of the Cold War, Britain, as well as America, as well as Soviet Russia and other countries, have subscribed to the idea of MAD, mutually assured destruction. The idea being, obviously, that your country maintains a nuclear deterrent and the ability at any point to fire enough nuclear warheads to completely destroy the aggressing nuclear power. In this case, for Britain, it would have been Soviet Russia, or nowadays modern Russia. The main way of maintaining that nuclear defense, of course, is SSBNs. That's the main job of SSBNs, to carry multiple nuclear missiles, today Trident missile, each of which have multiple re-entry warheads, which would be enough to destroy an aggressing country. Now, as bad and terrible as MAD sounds, it actually works, and it's proven over nearly 70 years to save millions of lives. Never since MAD has been in effect has a nuclear power aggressed directly on a nuclear power. So, it works. But it only works if the deterrent is not compromised, and that's what today is about. Compromising nuclear deterrent and removing that compromise. So, if we look at the Brits, for the last few decades, we've maintained a fleet of 4 SSBNs. Today, it's the Vanguard class, very much aging and difficult to maintain, soon to be replaced, hopefully. Of those 4 vessels, 1 must be out at sea at all times in a pre-designated patrol pattern, and that 1 submarine is Britain's nuclear deterrent. That doesn't sound much, but 1 SSBN carrying 12 Tridents, each with 10 or whatever warheads, is enough to completely destroy Russia. It's all we need. But that deterrent only constitutes MAD if that SSBN, that Vanguard, is not compromised in any way. So, the aggressing country, in this case Russia, during the Cold War and even in today's world, will try and compromise that SSBN. When I say compromise, I don't mean sink it, because obviously we're not at war. But if they can just find it, know where it is, and shadow it, and have the ability to fire on it if required, then that is the British deterrent removed. and Britain, only having one SSBN on patrol at a time, always walks an extremely fine line because we could have our nuclear deterrent compromised at any time. It's the job of the nuclear deterrent SSBN to never be found. 100% secrecy, 100% silent. Now, unfortunately, sometimes SSBNs can be found, and that is when it's required to delouse them, as the Navy say. So, let's look at our particular scenario. We go back to the chapter in our book in 1985. SOSUS has detected 5 submarines passing the GIUK gap, which means they're up to no good. They're doing something. So what happens in mid-1985 is from our only submarine base, which is Faslane here, 2 Trafalgar-class SSNs are launched. One captained by the author of my book. One has the job of locating from SOSUS information as many Soviet submarines as it can, identifying the priority submarine and shadowing it. The idea of shadowing is you stay behind it or to the side of it at a distance where you can hear it, but it cannot counter-detect you. You then follow it for as long as the mission requires. Quite often when you're following it, you will not be able to contact your tactical command, so your submarine commander has to be very well briefed on exactly which vessel he should follow and for how long. And there are some amazing stories of British, I haven't read about the Americans yet, that's my next job, but of British finding Soviet submarines and following them, and all kinds of amazing things happen, including very exciting, if not slow-paced, submarine-on-submarine dogfights. In fact, the whole idea of shadowing, maybe we can do a whole video on that if you want. At this point, I should say, I'm obviously not ex-Navy, and I pretend in no way to be an expert. I'm just reading books, and I'm just presenting them to you in 3D, or 2D at the moment. Anyway, so he goes over there and he tracks those submarines. Our guy splits here and he goes to periscope depth. He lays out his low frequency radio antenna, which is a long wire several miles long, allowing him to contact his tactical headquarters by radio. At this point, when he's at sea, he receives the position of the nuclear deterrent submarine, which in this case, that's his bullseye and that's his track. He then sails, making best speed to the deterrent. At this point, he doesn't really try and find the deterrent per se. He knows where the deterrent is. Instead, what he's looking for is a Soviet submarine that's got through the GIUK gap and has found and is shadowing the deterrent. At that point, our SSN has to approach the Soviet compromiser and shadow him. So you kind of get this trail of deterrent, compromiser, decompromiser. Now, no torpedoes are going to be fired, obviously, because we're not at war. But once we're shadowing that Soviet submarine, we can either just sit and watch, or we use our active sonar to ping him. He knows that he's been found at that point, and he's been compromised. At that point, he probably just goes away. Or, knowing the Russians, pulls a crazy Ivan and charges our submarine. But either way, we decompromise our nuclear deterrent. And that's our job today, guys. So that's it. That's my brief summary of the chapter I've read of investigating and shadowing Soviet submarines and the idea of delousing our nuclear deterrent. The same, I'm sure, will be true of US or even Soviet nuclear deterrent, but presumably on a much wider scale. So the next thing we're going to do is jump in many hours later once our commander is 80 miles away from this guy here, and I reiterate, we're having to use American vessels because we don't have the British vessels in game yet, and we're going to try and delouse him. So here we are in the depths. We're below the thermal layer. We are 60 miles away from the Vanguard class. Now remember, we can't see or we can't hear the Vanguard class. The Vanguard is specifically traveling at a certain depth and speed, which makes it almost impossible to acoustically detect it. But we know where it is because we know it's following a precise track that's been pre-designated, so we know he's there. We have the suspicion that a Soviet submarine may have found him and be compromising him, probably following from astern or maybe a rear quarter. We don't know if that's true, it's just a suspicion, and a lot of undersea warfare, I'm learning, is done by suspicion and probability. So, we need to close. So, let's close on our guy here. Let's make standard speed, which we probably are already. Make sure we're not cavitating. Now, remember, in terms of detection, we've got 2 real ways of detecting it. our hull-mounted sonar, which I'm not sure where it is on this. What have we got here? A Los Angeles class, so you let me know, viewers. It's usually a bulge somewhere. Or our towed array. Our towed array tends to be better for detecting submarines at long distances, so we'll probably be using our towed array. In fact, we may as well just drop it now. It's not going to cause us any problems to do that. The towed array is a very long cable of an array of acoustic hydrophones. Having an array like this is kind of a bit like an AESA radar, I suppose, in a way. It gives us lots of mini antennas, if you like, to build up a big picture, and usually it's better than the hull-mounted sonar at long-range detection. In fact, both have different benefits and weak spots. So this has better range, but its ability to find a hostile's bearing can sometimes be confused. The hull-mounted sonar tends to have less range, but tends to be better at keeping a steady bearing. So what we'll tend to do is start with a towed array. Once we've got close enough, we'll switch to our hull-mounted sonar, or an amalgamation of both. Now, in sea power, it's pretty simple, the way that the acoustic detection works. In real life, it's very complex. I mean, I've read about Cold War, so I don't know about modern, but in Cold War, you would have a small compartment full of guys listening to sounds and identifying them and processing them that way. Today, I assume it's all done by AI, but let me know your thoughts. So, we can have a quick listen. Now, the best way we listen is to go slow. The less noise we make, the easier we can hear the ambient sound around us. So down to 5 knots. We can't go less than 5 knots because we need to keep the towed array straight. And that's a problem when it comes to turning. We're going to turn now here. The towed array tends to work best, I mean it's much more complex than this, but it tends to work best listening out the sides for long distance. So I like to turn almost a beam and tow it for a while to listen to the sides. Now the problem is when turning, the array is no longer in a straight line, and the array only works in a perfectly straight line. So I have to turn and then go for many miles until the array straightens out, which is going to take a while, so let's let that happen. Everything has to be done like 100 times speed because everything takes so long. Already, 6 minutes in, 7 minutes in, still straightening the line, hope you can see that. And the line is straight. The array's now working, we're at 5 knots, that's optimal. The noisier our submarine is generally, the harder it is to hear, the more ambient noise we're making. In fact, there's loads of factors when you start reading about it, about what affects how well we are going to be able to detect not just our submarine, but obviously the hostile submarine, all of its parameters, and as well the ambient. What about the acoustic properties of the sea floor, the depth of the thermal layer, blah blah blah. It goes on forever, viewers. No detection, that's the best I can do. Let's head away. Now in real life I would probably adjust my depth as well, above and below the layer, but in this case we know that our nuclear deterrent is below the layer, so almost certainly to be compromising Soviet submarine would have to be below the layer as well. So let's go back up to standard speed and burn time away. 20 minutes in, 35 minutes in, we're 50 miles away from Franklin, Vanguard. What am I? I'm an astute, aren't I? Yeah, I'm an astute. 50 minutes in, and it's going to be lots of doing this, viewers, as you probably already realised. Right, we're going to go down to 5 knots. We're going to go a beam, straighten the antenna out. Now, today we're going to be looking for an alpha class because I wanted easy mode. The quieter the submarine is, the harder it is to detect, and the better the submarine is really. In the 1970s, the Russians put into service the alpha class, which is a hunter-killer, but it uses speed rather than stealth. It was in my opinion, a bit of a stupid idea, and was pretty soon countered by very fast-moving torpedoes. But when it came out, it did have its dangers. However, to go fast, you make noise. Naturally, going fast will always make more friction, make more noise. But as well as that, oh my God, we've just got him. Pause. Well, there's a brilliant example of how a noisy submarine can be detected. So, we've got him at 60 nautical miles. For sea power, that's pretty good. You wouldn't get a Victor 3 or something like that. But the Alpha is noisy. Why is it noisy? Russian submarines in the 1960s and 70s were designed fairly badly, not very stealthy. They got much better in modernity, and they're now, well, I don't want to say equal to US, but they're very good. But the Alpha, especially to get its crazy speeds of over 40 knots, which for a submarine is light speed, it had to use a liquid-cooled nuclear reactor, which, for reasons I couldn't possibly understand, makes lots of noise And so generally speaking, it's a noisy submarine. So an alpha wouldn't do this job in real life. It wouldn't really track an SSBN because it's too noisy. It would be counter-detected easily. But in this case, I just wanted to ensure that I could detect him. Right, so we've got him, although it's a very, very weak signal. I can't even read the amount of decibels. I think it says 4 decibels. So, I mean, that's very, very quiet. What we have, though, now on our plotting table is, if I can find my tool, there it is he's there. We know he's there with a relative degree of certainty because we'll probably lose the track. His direction, his vector, his tail is there, unsurprisingly. So, it turns out there is a louse. Our nuclear deterrent is no longer effective and we need to delouse our SSBN. So the next thing we need to do is close down. Now we know where he is, we need to do the approach. Now the approach is not easy because, as I said, underwater acoustics are extremely complex and it's very easy to lose contact or get bad bearings and mess up your approach. I'm reading at the moment about a commander that's just been fired because he couldn't approach submarines. He could find them on the towed array, but he couldn't do the approaches properly. It requires a huge amount of commanding skill. Again, maybe today it's all done by AI or whatever, I don't know. In this case, it's all done by manual plotting tables and very careful thinking commanders with coordinated executive officers. Speed up. So we're on, it's interesting that we found him at standard. Isn't that weird? Maybe, I don't want to guess why because I don't know enough about the acoustics, but it is very strange. Theoretically, at standard, head on is not very good for an acoustic array because it kind of has a baffle effect. It doesn't like looking forward very well because you've got a huge noise-making submarine here. It doesn't like looking backwards because of the baffle effect, of course. It really likes looking sideways. Right, and we have indeed lost it. It picked him up a bit. Maybe, the current in the ocean was favouring us for a bit. I don't know. Maybe even a particular piece of seabed we're over acted as an acoustic amplifier, a bit like Sosa's, and allowed us to see him temporarily, but now we've lost it. So, super interesting stuff. How well is it modelled in sea power? Well, I'll probably never know, but it's very interesting. So what we would know is that he would probably be going the same speed as the SSBN because he's shadowing him, and we could plot him where we think he is. So I'm going to put a dangly line out here. The approach, oh god, we're getting closer much closer than I thought, right down to 5 knots. I just want to go a beam again and just double check. Now, I don't want to get too close or go too fast because he can counter-detect me, and of course the Soviets counter-detected British and US submarines a lot, and vice versa, obviously, in the Cold War. And I should say, Soviet submarine commanders, I'm just relaying what my book says, but the crews, a lot of the time, were, what's the word? Not enlisted. You know what I mean? It was kind of there against their will, rather than there as a profession. Sorry, I forget the word now. But the officers, especially the commanders of the Soviet submarines, tended to be very experienced and capable. Right, well, annoyingly, I'm not picking him up. I'm at 5 knots, I've got my towed array out, I've got everything in my favour, but I'm not picking him up. I'm going to reverse course back here. Let's see if I can pick him up at that vector there. I'm going to quickly pop above the layer, although I don't think it's going to help. Array straightened. No, I didn't think going above the layer is going to help. Below the layer, it's one of those things, viewers, as soon as I turn the camera on, I can't find a bloody submarine. A very big, fat, noisy alpha. We're at 30 miles. I should really be finding him, a big, noisy alpha, unless he's AI and he may have just run away, and maybe I've lost him for that reason. Right, I'm below layer, check. Got him! Stop! Pause. Why didn't I find him in the various other times? I don't know. Lord knows, viewers, it's too complex for me. Anyway, we've got him at 32 miles. Okay, I'm going to designate him as hostile. Now I've got to make the approach. How we do that is your guess is as good as mine. Now, a lot of this is presumably very secretive stuff. I don't really want to approach him from a beam, viewers, do I? Because he's probably got a towed array as well. 23 decibels, that's loud. I should have heard him ways before that. So I was probably doing something wrong, viewers. Let me know your thoughts on that. Maybe my sonar team was having a day off or something. We are now 4 hours into the simulation, by the way. So I probably don't want to attack him from a beam because presumably he's going to have a towed array out and he's going to be listening from a beam. So what do you reckon? Rear quarter? I'm at 10 knots now. We've got a firm fix on him now. Now what we have to do is make sure we don't lose his track. He's turned, he's seen us. Well, I'm surprised that an alpha can counter-detect an LA going at 10 knots. Just knock it down to 5. Or has he seen us? Maybe he hasn't. What do you reckon? Look at his tail. No, he hasn't. It's turned back. I think he was having a little listen there. I doubt he's fired any torpedoes. In fact, he doesn't have the range to fire. Let's go 2/3 again. I reckon he was having a sniff. Now, it must be quite difficult in the Alpha as well, because he's got to track this guy here, which can be difficult, as you've seen. No, he's definitely seen me. Alright, fight's on. Now, this bit doesn't happen in real life. Well, it does, until the torpedoes are fired. I guess this does happen. So, one thing's for sure, we've successfully deloused the deterrent. The deterrent now presumably has a plan B, a second track it can go on once it knows it's been detected, and it can go onto that second track, which might be a different part of the ocean or whatever. But we've now got a fight, viewers, and I'm probably going to lose it. Let's see what I've got. A Mark 48, presumably that's an old, yes, it's an old block. At this point, you're probably expecting some kind of magic, but you're not going to get it. Realistically, I want to be as quiet as possible, right? And I want to displace a little bit. So let's go over there and let's see what happens. And I want to hear him at all points. He's following my track, so he can still see me. Look, you see that? He's going for an intercept course. Now, I might try a different depth. And he was sniffing. Look, he's gone back onto his course. He's lost me. He's lost me. So he heard me. He heard something. Probably didn't designate exactly what I was, detect what I was. And he's now going back on his mission and tracking the SSBN. Sucks to be you, sir. Now, at this point, I wonder if I can go deeper, viewers. Now, will that help me? I don't know enough about acoustics, so I don't know. But I'm going to try going deeper. I presume I keep my towed array. No, let's see if I can put the towed array in at this point. I might not need it. Towed array in. Oh, and I immediately lose him. Towed array back out, please. And I've got him again. Woof. Right, so definitely need to towed array out. Also, if I go... Oh, I've lost him. No, I'm going to have to go back up. Can we pick him up again? I mean, we know where he is, roughly. He's not going anywhere quickly. Well, he is an Alpha. We have firmly lost him. Let's try a different... It's maybe because I'm head-on due to the effect that we talked about. Got him! Alright. So, if I go above 5 knots, he detects me. If I go a different layer, I lose him. So, I've just got to go at 5 knots and hope I can get within a shot range. Obviously, we wouldn't actually take a shot in real life, but we want to. Look, we see him. Hey, he's found me again. He's counter-detected me. No, he hasn't. No, he hasn't. He just did a circle. Why do they do that? Well, some older submarines viewers actually didn't have pointable, what do you call it, sonar. They actually turned the submarine around. British submarines in the 1970s, I believe, had to turn their submarines around, some of the old SSKs, to scan, which is just the most stupid thing, right? But now, by forcing him to turn around like that, one thing that's happening is the Franklin's actually getting away. Because if I go above 5 knots, he seems to detect me and have a look, which we don't want. So 100 times speed. I'm below layer. My antenna's out. Ah, I've lost him again. Got him. We're painfully slow. We're losing him. We're going to have to speed up. Speed up. 10 knots now. We should be... He's probably sped up to catch the SSBN up. I've lost him. Is my towed array out? Yes. Is it straight? Yes. Am I at the right layer? Yes. Well, we seem to be at an aspect when he's gone quiet, viewers, and there he is. Wow, he's all the way down to 5 decibels. If he goes below 5 decibels, we can't get him. Right, he's doing something, and I might have a pop at him, viewers, just for the lols. Because lols, right? Right. The game's over now, viewers. We've done the count. We've deloused the SSBN, but just for fun. Let's try and shoot him down, shall we? I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not very good in submarines at fighting, as you know yet. I don't know enough about it, but when I fire my torpedo, what do? I change depth. I change everything. I change my there. I might even cavitate if I feel I need to. It's 80 nautical miles. It doesn't tell me his decibels. It should tell me his decibels. That'd be really useful if it did, because it will know how far off I am at detecting him. So Mark 48, presumably an old block. I'm reading it interesting at the moment in the late 80s. There was a choice to go to the American Mark 84 ADCAP or make our own indigenous high-performance torpedo, and we went for our own one. We went for Spearfish, which turned out to be, I think it's still in service now, but it had it was horrendous for the first 10 years. 50 knots, wow, that's pretty good. American torpedoes best der Welt. I'm also reading about how German torpedoes, the Argentinians in 1982 or pre-1982 bought submarines from Germany with German torpedoes and actually fired at British vessels. The torpedoes hit but failed to detonate. He knows we've been shot at because the torpedo is noisy, obviously. Now what's he done? I don't know. Let's go slow and try and find him. To the ether, I'm afraid. He's probably gone deep. I mean, he could have just used his 40 plus knot speed, turned away and gone to America. He could pretty much outrun the torpedo. We'll let this torpedo run, go active, and then we'll probably cancel the sim at that point. Oh, hey! Where are you going, sir? Right, that's it. Chase mode. Flank. Cavitate. Make noise. Charge him. Crazy Ivan. Has our Mark 48 found him? It hasn't gone active yet. Has he got the legs? 28 knots, the power of the nuclear submarine. Come on, go active, go active, go active, go active, go active. Ah, we missed him. Went dumb. Gone into a search pattern. I'm going to cancel their viewers because submarine battles can go on for hours, and that's not what I want to show. I didn't want to get into some dogfight. What I wanted to show was the... Oh, look at that. He fired a torpedo completely the wrong direction. So he fired at me, but he didn't know where I was. And so he knew there was a sound, but he didn't know where I was. So he just pumped his set 65s out towards America in completely the wrong direction. How embarrassing for him. All I wanted to show was the idea of why you made Delouses an SSBN and the reason for it. And even if we don't shoot him down, even if he goes deep, goes 50 knots and flies away, that's it, it's done. We have our nuclear deterrent in place. I hope you enjoyed that a bit, and bye-bye.